Right, good afternoon everyone. Welcome to this splendid building, and I'm hoping to have a look around afterwards, courtesy of the President who's sitting over there. Welcome on behalf of Limerick Writers' Centre and the publishing imprint Revival Press. We're here for another book launch. Dominic, the director of Limerick Writers' Centre, I'm afraid can't be with us today. He's hurt his leg, but hopefully he will recover. Of course he'll recover and he'll be here soon. But he's very adept at making a few phone calls to make sure that everything happens just as he wants it, and he's done that. If you have a phone, although it wouldn't be the end of the world if it went off, but it's probably useful if you take it off now. We're going to start off. Dominic would normally speak at this stage in the proceedings and welcome you on behalf of the Writers' Centre and talk a little bit about philosophy. And he has been, he's deputed that task to Lot Bender, who's over there. So Lot's going to come and speak now on behalf of Dominic Taylor, the Director of Writers' Centre.
Hey everyone. So I'm just got Dominic's speech straight off the press, so I'll see what I can make of this. He said, thanks to Donald, and thanks again to all of you for coming out this afternoon to celebrate the publication of Tim's book, The Lyrics to the Nightingale Song. Tim Cunningham is an important link with a great tradition that is contemporary Limerick poetry, which began with our own Desmond O'Grady and the Castle poets in the 1950s, and continues on today through the work of the Limerick Writers' Centre, the White House poets and other groups and individuals. As publishers, through our imprint Revival Press of lyrics, I just want to set out the role of the Limerick Writers' Centre. Since 2008, we have tried to bring ideas about books, literature and writing to as wide an audience as possible, and especially perhaps to people who do not feel comfortable in traditional arts, literature, venues and settings. Pablo Neruda, the Nobel Prize-winning poet, said that a number of years ago that poetry is like bread. It should be shared by all, by the vast, incredible, extraordinary family of humanity. That, in a small way, is what we try to do. The book we are launching today is the 46th title in the Limerick Writers' Centre, as published since 2008, under its Community Publishing Initiative. I'm sure a lot of you will know that increasingly more these days for writers to maintain integrity of their own work and to get their work published in book form is very difficult, especially with large publishers, who now control a significant amount of all books published in Europe and America. And as our own local poet, Kieran O'Driscoll, said recently on a radio programme, these publishers are not run by literary editors, but by marketing people. And basically for them, to publish an author, especially new authors, the book will have to conform to what they believe the market wants. At the Limerick Writers' Centre, we share a belief that writing and publishing should be made both available and accessible to all. We try as much as possible to represent diverse voices and advocate for increased writing publishing access to individuals and groups that have not typically had this access. Importantly, also we believe that the author should remain in control of their work, which means that they have a direct say in how the book is produced and where and how the books are ultimately sold and distributed. We believe that labour that goes into writing the book should not be appropriated by publishers, who then determine the use value of the fruits of that author's labour. What we argue for is a new model of aesthetic and cultural production and appreciation that retains the integrity of the creator of the product. At the Limerick Writers' Centre, we also try to promote writing done by ordinary people, people who may not be trained writers and may struggle to get their ideas down on paper. We value difference and welcome people who may lack confidence in themselves and their writing ability. Through our readings, workshops and writer groups, we encourage people to write and read their work to each other. In short, our aim is to spread a consciousness of literature, and we encourage everyone to engage actively within the literary community. Through public performances, we bring together groups of people who value literature not just for its literary value, but who see its transformative power both for the individual and society. We believe that stories, poems, diaries, memoirs do, as Seamus Heaney suggests, function as bearers of value. We are also, importantly, dedicated to printing short-run, high-quality produced titles that are accessible to all. We actively encourage writers, from the serious career-minded people who write for pleasure, healing, personal growth, insight, or just to inform, and over the years we have produced a broad range of writing, including poetry, history, memoir, and general prose. Often a large proportion of writers' experience of how they make sense of the world, whether through writing poetry or prose, can be lost to future generations. The Limerick Writers' Centre are engaged in recording and preserving these written experiences through what we call an Ark of Culture. Similar to Noah's Ark, we wish to take on board literary artefacts which will be wide and inclusive of all types of writing, and like Noah's Ark, we would hope that it can survive the flood of time that engulfs everybody and everything, leaving a legacy to enrich future generations. We believe that this is not just a worthy aim, but also an essential one. Left to the vagaries of the modern-day market, only what is deemed art by a select few will be preserved for future ages. We take the view that by celebrating all writers equally, and if we have the sensitivity to perceive the value of diverse voices, it will enrich the entire community. Our hope is that by preserving the artifact, adding to the art's precious content, we can also preserve the spirit that sparked its creation, or at least create curiosity by future generations about their past, which may in time rekindle that spark, and like the rainbow signify a new beginning. So to finish, on two counts, I'm delighted to see so many of you here today to support Tim's book launch. Firstly, it's great that Tim's work now takes its place in the Ark of Culture, and as a Limerick-born poet, he will continue to bring positive awareness of Limerick to a national and international audience. Secondly, it is through the sale of books like Tim's that we can continue to reinvest and publish new writers. So when you buy Tim's book, you're not only supporting him, but other local writers also. So to conclude, I'd like to thank a number of people who helped make this occasion a success. Thanks to Deirdre and Ian of the Shannon Boat Club, John Doherty, who will officially launch the book, and to my own colleagues at the Limerick Writers' Centre, Donald Thurlow, Pat McMahon, Jim Burke, Marion Cody, and I guess I won't thank myself, but thank Dominic so I think Dominic should get a thank you for a change, for putting all the work together. So I'm not sure I did as good a job as him, but I'll leave you with that. Thank you.
Lot is responsible for the splendid cover on this book, this volume, so he's done a great job there. Just a little bit about Tim. Tim was born in Limerick. He's worked mainly in education in Dublin, London, Delaware and Essex. I think there's 3 teachers at the front here, or ex-teachers. This is his 6th collection, and it coincides with the centenary of his father's birth in 1916. I'm reading Knute Skinner's words, which are on the back of the book. So, Tim excels in the observation of minute particulars in nature. Poems such as Grass Snake and the lavender bush outside number 19 are organised around them, but they frequently occur as casual details in poems of greater scope. For Tim is more than a miniaturist. His keen eye and encompassing imagination range over a large variety of deep and moving subjects, most notably when his focus is on mutability and the loss of friends and loved ones. Prominent in this collection are poems such as Gethsemane, White Water, and Ghostwriter, which deal with the untimely death of his father, who died of war when Tim was still a small child. But seriously as Tim's poems frequently are, they can also be very funny. Take, for example, the sophisticated humour of Where to Hide the Goldfish, or the good-natured humour of Page 17. There's also the rollick and exuberance of Amazing Grace, a poem celebrating Mayer's legendary Grace O'Malley. All of these poems, and the generous supply of other poems in this book, display Tim's command of tone, his apt and striking figurative language, and his musical ear. And these are Knute's words. I've long admired his work, and this collection simply strengthens my regard. Tim Cunningham is amongst the very best language poets of his generation. So that's some endorsement from Knute, so thank you very much. The book is going to be launched by a long-time friend. I think we went to 4 scores and 10, or was it?
Almost 60 years.
6, there you go. John O'Donnell. John is also teaching. John was a printer at one stage, and he's assisted Tim over the years. Obviously, great skill, proofreading as well. So we're delighted to ask John O'Doherty to launch this volume of poems.
in that movie Catch Me If You Can, the character playing DiCaprio playing the con man, he used the word "I concur" a lot. So I just want to say at the beginning here that what Knute says about among the very best English language poets of his generation, I concur without any problem. Yeah, I've known him for, as I said, 70 and maybe 9/10 of a score. And I've read all his poems, and it's almost impossible to describe what he's doing. I mean, we spoke a lot today about it as well. So I was kind of thinking to myself, should I just say one or two sentences and walk away and just maybe use signals? So I thought to myself, maybe could you find an image from the time I met him first when he was very young, 20, maybe 19, anyway, around that time. And at that time he was scratching in the dirt. So I was going to say, if I called what happened in this book from scratching in the dirt to revealing diamonds in a gold mine, would that get across? And it's a bit awkward, but it's fairly close. At the beginning, he was searching for modes of expression. And one thing that fascinated me, because I was a proofreader, was that his typing was impeccable. He's made no improvement in that score because his typing is still impeccable. But it's very difficult to find words, and you feel like using gestures. This is what rather informal, because the serious stuff has been said. I think it was Steven Spielberg at his 55th birthday. Somebody asked him with their hands. What they were saying was, "What's in the future?" And he said, "From now on, it's all about maintenance." Well, you know, an awful lot of things you can't really express in words. That's why I think I loved years ago Marcel Marceau, who was so eloquent with his work, with his silence. I yearned for the fluency, which Tim called somewhere language without words. Sounds kind of paradox, but that's sort of thing if we could reach it. Or even, as he calls it, naked words dancing across the page, attempting to fill the vacuum. Anyway, I've known Tim for almost 70 years and watched him and read his early stuff. For some reason he thought I could help him in his quest. An early indication of his extraordinary modesty as a poet and man. I was honoured by his trust of me, and also I said to be among the first, two others too, that were here, Brian and others. The poems were impeccably typed. This was always, I knew, a positive thing I could say. The poems were impeccably typed. But now and again, there had to be something like, well, I was trying to give him some little direction, and one day I found it. And to this day, I regret what I said to him, and I wanted to shoot myself as soon as it came out of my mouth. He gave me a bunch of poems, and I said, "Yeah, these are definitely you're on the way. Some of these are as good as the worst of Wordsworth." I wanted to shoot myself because the worst of Wordsworth is very bad indeed. Okay. So it was at least. I should point out. Point of even mentioning this, he expressed delight at being mentioned in the same breath as Wordsworth. And I think that's good. I still regret it, but I think, why did I say that? Could I not said it in a better way? Because those of you who know the worst of Wordsworth, I measured it from side to side, it was 2 foot long and 3 foot wide. Awful stuff. So at the beginning, Tim was enchanted by rhyme. He mentions in one of his own poems, the one called page 17, about being infatuated by rhyme, and I think he was himself in those early days. He's still a very modest man, extraordinarily modest, given, I say that what Knute said, and I agree with that, among the very best English language poets in his generation. Is quite extraordinary. I've known many poets that worked with them, and not on their poetry, but in their company. I mentioned one, Seamus Healy, I worked together for 7 years, and Seamus Healy, as you know, was the 1995 Nobel laureate for poetry, and Tim, whimsically refers to him as famous Seamus. Certain not modesty in that as well, but he celebrates him magnanimously and exquisitely in De Lune. And I think Tim may read this poem later on. Another interesting thing is that one of Tim's poems, Tabernacle, was quoted at a conference on the theological aesthetics of Pope Benedict. And Cardinal Pell, in use for other reasons at the moment, Archbishop of Sydney, asked for a copy of the book of poems. And Tim was amazed. Tim wrote, "How amazing to be quoted in a conference in liturgy and aesthetics." It almost sounds a bit like the imposter syndrome. Why not be quoted in such a context? Quite amazing. A little bit about Limerick. I was born down in the next county over there, and I thought he was come up to Limerick to Burton's to buy his suits. Anyway, when I think of Limerick, I think of your great Paulie recently, your Dumbledore, your Kate O'Brien, your President Higgins, and the long list of distinguished artists, sportsmen, and women. So, having been born in Tipperary, I grew up thinking that Nick Mackey was the equal of Cuchulainn, even though we were in a rival county for hurling, we still thought that he was the greatest. So, when I think of poetry, I tend to think of Tim Cunningham as a poet who is the epitome of Limerick. Tim's wife Alex, during one of Tim's frequent visits to Limerick, in an email wrote that Tim was dreading returning here, he doesn't know this, returning home, that's his London residence, from what is still home to him. I think it's very touching in a way that he, dreading going back to his beloved wife and family, and because this is his home. So all you have to do is read Sacred to the Memory to witness his infatuation with his native city. And I've walked on the city several times with him, and he's in love. He's in love. Coming to some of the poems, I'm not going to mention too many poems because he's going to do that himself, but use a kind of slang term. I'm blown away when I read what he has written at times. Where did this encyclopedic knowledge come from? Everything is there. Art. Everything. Some of the most moving poems that I read, or not in this collection, but in Curia, mysteries. It grabs it. It's really incredibly moving stuff. Many of it is these constellations of images, many of them suggestive of cathedral windows. Several people have mentioned Vermeer with a symphony, and yet almost invariably accessible. You can pick up any Tim Cunningham poem and it makes sense. I don't know, certainly for me, I get, I don't know what I get, but something deep, deep down. One of my eccentricities when I read poetry for the first time is I watch the incidence of, let's say, simple words, monosyllabic words. And it's extraordinary. So many of Tim's poems, the majority of them are monosyllabic words, and yet they're beautiful, beautiful poems. Who but Tim could write something like this, like measles or the first dark drips of the Jackson Pollock. Where did that come from? Anyway, as I said, I'm blown away, and in my sort of peasant patois, I want to say it as far from Jackson Pollock you were raised, but his mind ranges over all parts of it. This is the thing about Tim's poetry. Delightful language and imagery just come at you and leave you in awe. Waits to be hit by sudden jolts of emotion. It's extraordinary reading down next to it. It's like some sort of a tug or a jolt to the heart. Trappist monks bonded like Amish neighbours building a farm. It's extraordinary. Richard Halpern refers to Tim's homely touch and his risk-taking. There is nothing he avoids or censors. I even asked him that today. I said, do you ever censor yourself? No. And yet he does it with what appears to be total tranquility, calmly, without fuss, without seeming busier than he is. He reminds me a little bit of Joyce's description of the artist like the god of creation. remaining within or behind or beyond or above his handiwork, invisible. You hardly notice them, you find out of existence. One of the words you don't meet very often in Tim's poems is the word I. It's there, but you have to search for it. It's very rare, it's amazing. The present collection is dedicated to almost memory of his father. I think that this is one of the major things in Tim's life. And when I met him first in his early 20s, I always must have a slight sadness about him. I never knew why. It wasn't much later that I heard about that his father had died in the war. And I think that everywhere throughout his poems, in the most unlikely places, there are kind of allusions or hints. Even such an unlikely poem as, well, not an unlikely poem, the title poem, lyrics to the Nightingale song, where he mentions the unknown soldier's dog tag. All right, he's not maybe specifically, but just a mere mention of it. Or as what almost seems an afterthought in the final line of Memory Bank, how his hands long to remember holding his father's hand. I'm almost close to tears when I read that. The Ballylough now, 1916, is grimmer, and when he mentions the voracious jaws of World War II's Italian front in 1944, years Tim's father died. And even the things that he doesn't seem to specify or drag out, so nothing is less true because it is left unsaid. Look at the poem Dancers for another eloquent reflection on what I read as a eulogy of his parents. Now, just to finish up, I talked quite a bit to him earlier today. Have you ever suffered this thing, the mystics call the dark night of the soul? He doesn't. It's as simple as that. James Healy did. He told me one time that was one of his greatest fears of going through a bad patch, and he was in a state, I would say, of terror. As the mystics were, but here's a living man in the 20th century, and that was his single preoccupation. To finish, we discussed with Brian too earlier on there, will Tim keep writing? I about him today as well. Heard melodies are sweet, those unheard are sweeter still. I think it's going to just come. It's all there. He doesn't have to work on it. So many poets have to work so hard. I mean, I remember years ago we were down in the Hunting Museum looking at the manuscripts of Yeats' poems. How they got them, I don't know. But anyway, seeing there 8 versions of one stanza of one of his poems. 8 versions. Crossing out, adding, that kind of stuff. I think with Tim, I don't think he's sensitive. I said that earlier on. So there's a torrent of poetry to come. I cannot foresee a dark night of the soul because his unheard melodies are lined up, waiting to enter the night. That's it.
Thank you, John, for that lovely introduction. And I got the PDF of the book a few days ago. Just to mention 3 poems, poems that demonstrate humour, bravery, compassion. A very short poem called Dancers. That's got the best last line I've read in a poem for a long time. There's another one about air kissing, mwah, and that's also has many, many references in it. As one of the diaspora, I went to England when I was 12 and returned about 15 years ago. And in the early years, we travelled on the boat often, and I saw many, many guys going and coming back. In other words, we went backwards and forwards on holidays. And the compassion in the poem called Return of the Exile is wonderful. And finally, anyone that can write a poem that has a title called All That Jazz at the Crematorium is some poet. Our poet today, Tim Cunningham.
Spent half an hour thanking people. It's not the Oscars. The cover of this by Lottie is absolutely brilliant. So I'm safe with Alex because she has to like the cover. She killed me. And at the back, what Knute said that it isn't just wonderful, I'm eternally grateful now. Instead of saying, yes, Lord, whatever you say, Lord, do the boss, do the best, I'll be able to say, remember, what did Knute say? I got away with that once, well, nearly. Yeah? But anyway, thank you so much. And listening, it's just whatever they were talking about. He's sounds very interesting. But who was involved, and I think Christy was able to give me the name. It's a young girl, 15 years of age, a traveller child. She was in school one day and used her school tie that night. Her school tie. She wore her tie to school, the traveller child with spring blossoming on her cheeks, and love's confusion lost in the maze of her heart. Too brief for a journey. She wore it again later in the day, but a tie was never meant to be worn that way. And this is the one about the person I knew in London, who had hardly anybody caring for him. And then when he came back, he had this most wonderful funeral, church packed, everybody drinking to his memory. People will be ignoring him all his life. It's eternally exiled. By my standards, it's a little long. For London's forgotten Irish. There are a handful of people here that I know from experience who were actually in London when it was very, very difficult. And at a time when I was also extremely lonely there, and it helped me through. It's going back a bit. Return of the Exiled for London's forgotten Irish. Mother Ireland orphaned him. Poverty drove him to the boat. Rosslare, Fishguard, or Dunleary, Holyhead, a generation's choice across the trodden railroad to London's bedsit land, to morning's Spalpeen corners and the gangers' vans. Danny boy, and I'll take you home again, Kathleen, where pick and shovel spirituals, Guinness and the crack, the evenings anaesthetic, augmented at the Gantry by Larry Cunningham's guitar strings tugging at shy hearts, and Brendan Boyer's Hucklebuck, still bucking its huckle all the way home on the N90 bus. Not the place he meant by home, destination in the early days for the fortnight's holiday, the odd wedding and funeral, before Scissors' ears snipped at the hawser, set him adrift from his moorings. The waves of a changing world crashing relentlessly down. They found him in his chair, spent as the last shilling in the meter. The Roberts still tuned to Radio Erin. On the mantelpiece, a photo of the Kathleen he never took home. Family flew him back, Shannon with their windows. Again, pick and shovel diggers, as Mother Ireland greeted him with arms of open clay, her welcome 6 feet deep. That night the Guinness flowed and the crack was mighty. Get a bit cheerful now. I was walking out in Bangor in Cornwall years and years and years ago, and I think Amazing Grace was popular at the time or whatever, and I heard about this male pirate, some very, very, very interesting woman, and just thought, oh, we call her Amazing Grace. What was her name? Her name was Amazing Grace O'Malley. So I had the last line of the poem. I think I wrote it about 10 years later, because I couldn't find anything to say apart from I had the refrain. So the rest of it is a bit of a biography I picked up and a bit from that. But then the refrain is mine. Amazing Grace. What pirate queen sails through the mists of legend and of history, when women were the devil's ballast? What woman commandeered the mast? Who named plunder and piracy as maintenance by land and sea? Who else but Grace? Who split the Burke and Brehon law, divorcing him from castle walls? Who seized the castle at Ballycroy, revenge for killing her toy boy? Who else but Grace, Amazing Grace? Who fought both Sydney and Red Hugh with blazing sword and royal crew? Who stripped the castle roof of lead and poured it on the invaders' heads? Who gave the Fortin galleons hell, the nurse of all rebellions? who refused to bend the knee before perfidious Albion's queen. Who else but Grace, amazing Grace, the pride of her race? Who strutted Lady Gregory's stage and tongued the voice in Finnegan's wake? Who draws the wild notes of the pipes, the mystical of the harp? Who inspired the pen of Pierce, the metric waves of Ferguson? Who still fires beacons along the coast of women's lives? Who claims that ghost? Who else but Grace, amazing Grace, the pride of her race, amazing Grace O'Malley? It took me 10 years to get someone to build up to that. 1916, the commemorations that are going on, and which is wonderful. But for me, it's also very, very personal. My father was born in 1916, and it's the first one. Sorry, a telescope. Vodka's lovely. Telescope 1916, 2016. I haven't got much time for revisionists. People who sit behind their computers and toss out a few words and get well paid for it, complaining about people that have done the first thing about because maybe they didn't do things the way they'd like them to have done centuries ago. Telescope 1916-2016. A century long, this telescope, and inevitably tarnished by time. We remove the cap, look back through history's focal length, that tunnel of distortion, back through the chromatic aberrations of school texts and local legends, through the mist of incense and beeswax candles, the alliance of tiger and roaring lion, dust crashing like space debris. And looking back, we are not turned to salt, but peer through salt's corrosion. From the now end of the telescope, we see the past in miniature. The polished eyepiece lens was for the visionaries, their eyes too young for cataracts. And Gethsemane, my parents, they used to go to Mass in St. Joseph's Church. They were married in St. Joseph's Church, and my mother told me one time exactly where they used to sit and kneel. And of course, when he wasn't there, I should be thinking about him. So I go to the same place like a pilgrimage, it's a beautiful, absolutely beautiful church, a beautiful altar there, but it is a bit like a sarcophagus, and this white marble. It took a while, first of all, to realise that it actually is sculpture of Gethsemane, and then you think about the waiting. Gethsemane. I wrote on the 70th anniversary of my father's death. 3 down, 2 across. Not a crossword puzzle, but the longitude and latitude of where you knelt and sat at St. Joseph's Sunday Mass every week of those 3 halcyon years before the grenade, the field hospital, the War Office telegram. Today I kneel and join you here before the marble altar, shaped like a sarcophagus. It sculpted Christ accepting the angel's chalice, the 3 apostles sleeping. Time's interloper, I have never been so awake, sharing this out-of-time moment, not measured in eons, or the distance between then and now, this chip of eternity. The Lost Reader, this isn't too cheerful, it's an environmental poem. You are not reading this because you don't exist. Neither can you hear the nightingale or watch a sizzling sun sink into the horizon. We apologize for this, except we are entirely to blame. Our ignorance and greed drowned out the decades of warnings and unwanted proofs. We were the scorpion on the frog's back. Unable to resist our nature, we stung him halfway across the river and deserved the ground. Now that we have learned our lesson, and like the Bible character are desperate to warn, there are no ears to listen, no eyes to read. A non-generation cannot take heed. Anyway, why would you listen to us? Not now, now that the nightingale is extinct, and the fingers of a black sun fade to find a grip, clambering above the horizon at what used to be dawn. Cheerful. but we do need to look after the place. The title poem, the lyrics to the Nightingale song, is probably quite misleading. It's just one of the lines in it that I use. I read this, this was in at a Essex Poetry Festival. People seem to like it, so I said I'll try it for the title, but it worked out really very well. When you do of the cover, it's a lovely cover. The Nightingale. The lyrics of the Nightingale song. Prefacing this, I have a lot of poems about when I was a kid. I think the previous book. About 6 years of age, I was out in Ballyhan, Newcastle West, and there was my grandmother's place where my father grew up, and there was a massive rock. I remember it being maybe just a pebble, right? I remember it being a massive rock, massive sandstone rock. And we got a parcel from my mother. I was there with my sister for a week or so, and I remember having the string from the parcel, using that as a line and a bit of stick, and sitting on this rock and dipping it in the stream, which must have been the best part of 2 inches deep, and waiting to get this salmon, and everybody would be so pleased having this lovely salmon for tea. That's a long wait. That was the sort of awareness. This another point he uses that, but that was sort of the awareness of when she'd be there at the half door and seeing me thinking of her own son. So this, although it mightn't seem like it, actually does refer and came from that. The lyrics of the Nightingale song. All morning I have cast my line fishing from this rock and landed Cinderella's slipper, half a rainbow, an apple Shangri-La, the shadow of the invisible man, Tolstoy's death rattle, a crater from the dark side of the moon, Casanova's foreskin, 4 digits on the formula for love, the final chapters of Edwin Drood, a tusk from the elephant's graveyard, Jack the Ripper's relationship with his mum, the lyrics to the Nightingale song, the unknown soldier's dog tag, the smoke of our fire, Cleopatra's recurring dream, and the flutter of an angel's wing. Just imagine what I might have caught if I had used a book. The Irish for salt is thanks to Christy down there, who was telling me that he was the cousin to a friend of mine from way back when I was at school. And I rang this said gentleman, had a lovely conversation. He said, "This was such a lovely chat, let's meet up." And he wasn't the same Tony Hickey at all. But I got the poem from it, and he goes, "Thank you, Christy, for this." It's funny when you're a kid, the things that people do, I presume they don't even realise why they're doing it, you know. But we had a friend of mine in a class in primary school, and the teacher said, "What's the Irish for salt?" And I'm not sure whether he knew it or not initially, but he wouldn't say. I can understand that. But then the teacher told him. I said, "No, what is it?" And he wouldn't give him the satisfaction of telling him. He was just stubborn. The Irish for salt for Tony Hickey. A metronomic torture. Say sullen. Silence, then the strap. Hickey wouldn't say the word, even when the teacher almost pleaded. Say sullen. Salt is sullen. Say the word. We still don't know why he refused. Perhaps he didn't even know himself. He never said a word, he never cried, just held his hand out for the strap. The eyes that filled with salty tears were mine. The raw pink hand was his. The hand that grew, and years later, reached out again, grabbed my hair, and rescued me from drowning. It wouldn't fit the poem, but he was the guy who made you in the first place. So it wouldn't have been drowning if he let me know, but he did actually help to pull me out up at the tail race. I was going down 5 times. I remember going down 4 and 5 times, saying this shouldn't be happening. You're supposed to go down 3 times. What's the problem? What's going on? And I really recommend it. You know, if you're thinking about to go, it's a good way. And I could hear these little birds twittering, and I could see the little stars twinkling and so on in the water. I have a sequence of poems, and the last of those is Elegy for a Sonnet, and it's really looking at being old, but it's looking at in the form of looking at at poetry. And I followed them, the last two then would be one De Lumine. I felt very presumptuous having any poem linking with Seamus Heaney. But my own contact with Seamus Heaney, very, very sweet. I had lost contact with Jack Doherty for years, and I didn't know how to get in touch, but I knew he was in America. So I thought, I'd write to Seamus Heaney a favour and ask him, because I knew they were friends. And so he got John Doherty's address and posted it to me. It was very, very kind of it. Just think of all the demands and the plans work. I'm really, really impressed by that. And that'll be on a little reference to Seamus Heaney. And then O'Grady said, I explained that when I get to it. Elegy for a Sonnet. The elegy stands on a hilltop with snow in her hair. She has shouldered her Sisyphus sorrows and joys to the summit, looks down at the meadow of her sonnet spring, with its tango of daffodils and buzz of impetuous bees, its skin freckled with buttercups, the burnished pre-Raphaelite hair, that fluttering dress patterned with painted ladies and cabbage whites, those gypsy roses jewelled with dew, reading palms eager as daisies opening to first light. She looks down from that future and smiles, this elegy without tears. I used to, when some of the earlier ones, dealing with the life cycle, ending with death, but I then started getting into resurrection. De Lumine. It's a pretentious little title, as if it's a thesis about light, De Lumine, anyway. James Heaney. I feel confident reading this because I got a lovely letter back from Heaney after I sent her a copy. To think of you is to think of light, a light that never dazzled but lived its raison d'etre to illuminate, shining on river, rock and tree. Your words are shards of sun, chips of moon, highlighting the fields and bordings of emotion, the cellars and libraries of thought, searching the heart of the tribe. Words that splash and squelch, muddy boot words that spatter, won't collude with roses without thorns, but rip the mask from immortelles. Words that spit and sizzle on the fire, green words, veins bursting with sap. Words that let you hear the wing beat of the cabbage white and smell the colour in the flower. Words intimate with bedroom and the grave. As if shaken from a sack of cloud, your star now shines from another galaxy, light years from the boy who took a tall red Christmas candle from the window and doused the flame between finger and thumb. I did quite deliberately have the reality at the end of that, because of course Seamus Heaney to everybody is up there someplace, but he was a real person. He was a boy at one time and would have done things like that. And then the last one I read is called O'Grady Said. I grew up in John Square, and then we got to Atlantic, but in John Square we were always outside. I always remember my image of John Square. There's a poem in here called John Square, actually. It's not at all like that. It's having to go the council and these things up. But this is different. But I was playing games outside all the time. We had seasons of different games all the time. And one of the games, you didn't need any equipment for it, just called O'Grady Said. And you stand in front of your friends, and you told them to do something. Like you might say, pull your ear, and you did that, and you're out. You can't do anything until you hear O'Grady Said. And you carry on like this, and you say, well, just touch your nose, no, you're out, I didn't say O'Grady Said, this kind of thing. And then Bertha had Desmond O'Grady very, very generously giving prizes to young poets who were at school down at one year with the Cushla. And he was giving them advice. And I was thinking of this link. And I said, they'll go off now, and they'll listen to what he said, and they'll take his advice, they'll do what he said. And why did they have to do it? Because O'Grady said, So it just fitted with the game. And I grew up in John Square, and the area is exactly there, so it just seemed to be a nice fit to end with that. O'Grady said, and then we had Desmond. Well, I must say, first I met Desmond O'Grady. Didn't know him, I hadn't just met him a few times, but the first time I met him was in London, and he was doing a reading at a very prestigious place in Earls Court Square. And he did a brilliant reading, full of women who seemed to have acquaintance with him in the past. But he was a very, very popular man, it seems. And he did a lovely down-to-earth reading. And the person reading with him was one of these little, anal people. The stuff was, it was neat. He was able to count syllables up to 10 accurately, but there was no life, there was no soul whatsoever. And Desmond O'Grady just fell asleep and started snoring. And when I made a hearing, I told him that, and I thought he'd say, "Yeah, wasn't it great? I was so pleased I did." And I said, "I didn't really? Oh, how rude of me!" But he did. O'Grady said, in memory of Desmond O'Grady, St. John's Square rang with the cathedral bell and the laughter of children at play. Street games revolving with the seasons, hopscotch, conkers, daubers, hoops. Queenie, Queenie, who has the bow? And one needed only words. O'Grady said, return from your island's odyssey, possessor of poetry's golden fleece. You read in London's Elcourt Square, where we planted echoes of Angelus bells, of morning mist and sunset on the Shannon, shared shibboleths of Limerick's remembered streets. Years closer to your own impending sunset, you came again to John's familiar square, and Master Macker, proffering insights to young prize-winning poets on how to further raise their game, advice on discipline and craft they snapped to when O'Grady said. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you for that, Tim. That was lovely. My mum's not with us, she passed away, but she would have loved those poems. And I have many volumes of several poets in this room on my shelves at home, and I'll be glad to add this one to them. Thank you to John Doherty for lovely and affectionate words to launch the book. Dorothy is not in the room at the moment. Dorothy Quinn is the new president of this club, and she's made us feel very welcome, so we thank Shannon Club as well. Thank you all for coming, thank you for finding us today, and if you want to buy a book, Tim will happily sign it for you. Thanks very much, everyone.